Thank you. So one of the things I think that really sets us apart from developing nations, third world countries and those, is that we have an ability to clean water, and we have an abundant clean water supply for use. So this is something that we normally take for granted. So all of us flew to Orlando. I flew from Dallas. I didn't give a second thought to, when I get a drink out of that tap here in the hotel, is it going to make me sick? That's not the case everywhere in the world. So during my Air Force time, I actually had the privilege of being on a team where we would travel all around the globe. And we would get a standard safety briefing before we went, and they would cover all those topics that you think that they should cover. They'd cover terrorism in the area, crime in the area, weather. Is it earthquake prone? Where do you evacuate to? Where is your local embassy if you have to get there and get out of the country quickly? And one of the other things that we always covered was, can you drink the water? I mean, that's a pretty basic question, but one that we take for granted. I don't take it, I take for granted the fact that I'm not going to get sick. It's not the case everywhere in the world. So my presentation, as Rob said, is going to be a little bit different. So I'm going to present from my perspective, and I have a dual role at the authority, Trinity River Authority. I'm the CIO, Chief Information Officer, in charge of all IT operations on the business side, and also the CISO, in charge of all information and IT security, to include the industrial control system side. So I'm not going to be talking technical. I'm going to be talking more from a management level. And the hope for that is that by giving you guys a peek behind that curtain as frontline security practitioners or managers, it'll help you be able to get your initiatives moving, and also to know what a person at that level is looking for when you go to brief them, ask for money, etc. Okay, so this is what we're going to cover. I'm going to start off with a little bit of water background. I'm going to end with my perspective that I've got over the last almost 4 years of being at the authority, and go through that case study that Rob mentioned. So the Trinity River Basin. So we are actually in the state of Texas. The Trinity River Basin covers about 18,000 square miles in the state of Texas. It is from north of Fort Worth, goes down all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. And we provide direct services, water, wastewater treatment for 1.8 million people in the state of Texas. But about half the population of the state of Texas relies on the Trinity River Basin as a potable water source, whether it be for irrigation, whether it be for actual drinking water, etc. So about 13 million people depend upon us and our ability to protect that as a water supply now and into the future. So we're divided up into 2 regions. In the northern region, we've got 5 wastewater treatment plants. They go from about 3 million gallons a day up to 162 million gallons a day. So wrap your mind around that. I mean, that is a lot of waste coming through the plant and being utilized. Down in the southern, we also have 1 water treatment plant up there that pumps out about 87 million gallons per day, or is permitted for 87 million gallons per day. And then in the southern region, we have some smaller facilities down there, water provision and treatment plants that go up to about 12 million gallons a day, and we control the dam on Lake Livingston and the reservoir at Lake Livingston, which is the water source into the future for the city of Houston. So in junior high school, we all learned about the water cycle, right? So we have evaporation from the ocean, it goes up, it turns into clouds, it turns into rainfall, it comes back down, runoff, the cycle continues on and on. So what I'm going to talk about first is the dark side of that water cycle that they didn't really teach you about in school. So inside that loop, there are a bunch of other little iterations, which all start right here. So they start in your home, or from stormwater runoff, or from industrial use of water and facilities, etc. And then they go through a series of pipes to a wastewater treatment plant. This is our 162 million gallons per day treatment plant, and I'm not going to go into the specifics of that, so you can thank me for that. So we'll look at it as it's just a big black box of biology and chemistry, and it is supported by 149 people who work at that plant and 160 PLCs, which control and monitor operations of all the equipment at that plant, which are used to process that water. So at the end of that, there's what's called an outfall, where up to 162 million gallons per day of treated wastewater go, anybody want to take a venture a guess? Back into the Trinity River basin. So from there, this is an intake at a water reservoir that pulls water from the reservoir. It goes into a water treatment plant, which is our 87 million gallon a day treatment plant. And from there, it is pumped back out into the system as drinking water or potable water for people to use. So do we have anybody in here from Houston? A few people from Houston. So just to make a point here, this is the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Sorry. However, I can tell you just a real quick story. So I go on tours with plant managers. So our plant manager at one of our wastewater treatment plants is taking everybody through the tour of the plant. Really interesting if you ever have the chance to go. You'll learn a lot about science that you probably never wanted to know. But he got to the point, and it's at the last sampling station before that water actually goes out of the plant and back into the system. And he got a question. A lot of times you do, right? Somebody said, well, what's the quality of that water before it goes back into the river? And offhandedly, he said, it's better quality than what you would pull out of the river before you hit the wastewater treatment plant. It's cleaner water than what is actually out there in the river today. And, he could have gone into a lot of statistics and a lot of explanation of biology, et cetera, but instead he took the sampling cup, threw it down into that basin, pulled it back up on the chain, and drank right from there. So for those of you that are in Houston, you guys have a quality product that's going down there. And if that plant manager who sees the operation every day is willing to drink right from his outfall, I'm pretty confident that we're putting out a very good product going forward. Okay, so just real quickly about the importance. So this is a picture of the Superdome. Everybody remembers Hurricane Katrina back in 2005. So the Superdome was designated as the shelter of last refuge for those people who could not or did not want to leave the city. They were told, go to the Superdome. That's where you'll have protection from the elements. You'll have shelter. You'll have water. You'll have food. Things will be provided for you. You will be safe. All of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? So what you wind up with is about 15,000 people who decide that they're going to take shelter in the Superdome. They're going to ride out the storm. And the Superdome itself is designed for about 75,000 people on game day and about 5-6 hours worth of traffic. So you got 15,000 people. I mean, what could go wrong? Well, they also rely on other infrastructure services, right, to support the Superdome. So power was cut off at one point. Water was cut off. All those things. And what you wind up with is this. They had no way to deal with what that wastewater was or what it would do to that ecosystem. So you have an ecosystem of the Superdome, which is totally viable, can support life, and then 3 days later, what you have is a semi-toxic environment and a ruined ecosystem. So again, one of the things that we kind of take for granted that other people in the world don't is, that waterborne disease. So typhoid, cholera, diphtheria, those things we rarely hear from here, but still across the world, what you wind up with is, according to the World Health Organization, you've got about 3 million people that die from waterborne disease every year. Something, thankfully, we don't have to worry about here. So some of the specific challenges that we deal with in the water industry, and probably not very different than what you guys are dealing with. So we have silos. So when I got to the authority about 4 years ago, we had operations, we had IT, we had maintenance of all that plant equipment, we had, well, within operations, we had operations at multiple plants. Nobody talks to each other. Each one of these is its own little silo. So one of the things that I did to help to break down those silos, the most important thing that I think you can do is to build relationships and add value, right? So as the IT person, as the CIO coming in and the CISO, what I did to step into that role is every Friday I said, hey, I'm gonna go visit a plant manager. So one of those people that are out on the front lines, and I'm gonna establish a relationship with them and break down those walls and generate some trust. So I would go out to their facility, and depending on where they were, it may be a full day to get down to Huntsville and to get back up to Dallas, or it may just be a few hours, just depends. But what you're able to do in breaking down those silos is if I go and meet them on their turf, I have a discussion with them and I say, okay, what are your issues? What kind of issues are you having in your plant? And, you know, we have a conversation. I get out my pen and paper and I take down a lot of notes. I write down everything that's going on in that plant. Some of it's security related, some of it's IT related, some of it's not related to that at all. But the most important thing that I could do to build that relationship is I would then take that plant manager's problem list and I would walk back over to the headquarters building, and if it's a finance problem, I could walk into the CFO's office and I say, hey, we've got a problem with finance at plant X. Can you work this and get it fixed for them, right? And by being able to do that and being able to step out of that role of what they had of traditional IT and traditional security, which is we're just going to tell you no all the time, you can't do these things, we were able to establish those relationships with those plant managers so that when I have a security initiative now, I have access to walk into their office, they will sit down, they will talk to me, we'll come to an agreement on what that security needs to be, and they have an avenue. If they have a problem, they don't have to come to me as an adversary. They can come to me as somebody that they know and trust. So in my 4 years at the authority, I would say that's the most important thing that I've done. Not putting out security per se, but in establishing a trust and a relationship with those plant managers going forward, that they will come to me if they see something going on in their network that I might not see. Or they will come to me if they have physical security issues. They will come to me if they have operational issues, and I can get the right people and be aware of it and get to work on it as quickly as possible. So I'm not going to talk about funding a whole lot. Each one of our plants is its own, it has to be its own standalone funding entity. It has to support its own operations, and it will get that from you guys who may be our customers. One thing is that I did have an issue with is size. Size matters, right? So our relationship with each one of our plants is different. When we went through those numbers at the beginning, the resources that my 162 million gallon a day plant has with 149 people at it and multiple engineers, et cetera, are much different than the resources they have at a 1 million gallon a day plant. I have 149 people at one, I may only have 3 people at the other, right? And the skill sets are very different. So in the large plants, a lot of times we're just consultation and advice. They can take care of the majority of their own problems. But at our smaller plants, we're response. We're the ones that are going out and we're finding the contractors and getting them to come on site to fix the issues. We're monitoring their activities so that the plant operations personnel can do what they need to do, which is operate the plant. They're not generally skilled in any kind of network or security, that kind of stuff. So they can't really take care of that function anyway. So I bring to the table those people that can oversee contractors and do that. And one thing that some people who have cyber regulation may differ with me on is regulation isn't always a bad thing. It's great to have that hammer of regulation to go into the funding meetings and the board meetings and say, we have to do it. I understand it's both a blessing and a curse, right? So those of you that live under more stringent cyber regulation probably have a different opinion than I do. There's some gray area there in the middle that would probably be good for both of us, but not having that hammer of regulation of these are the list of must-dos, everything becomes a funding and a trade-off battle right in the boardroom. So when you go into the boardroom, my people have to present me with a case that says, this is why it's important, and this is why we're going to take money out of operations and maintenance to do these initiatives. And then we have to sell to the operations and maintenance people what value we're bringing to the table. And then again, it goes back to relationships in the beginning. If they trust you, they will listen. If they do not trust you, everything becomes a battle about dollars and cents. All right, so real quickly, case study. So our event, so we had a planned maintenance activity at one of our plants. The entire site is being brought down power-wise, 8 o'clock. Luckily, and this has not always been the case, the construction manager and the plant manager actually talked beforehand, right, before they dropped the power. Everything is coordinated, everything is running on. Maintenance activities are conducted, new building is brought online, power is restored at noon. Everybody's thinking it's going to be a great early day. We're going to go enjoy our weekend. Well, in the title, I used a different word, but stuff happens, right? I mean, this is the way it is. So right after they brought it down, we started suffering comm failures. The ops center actually got oversaturated with traffic and went down. And the plant, luckily, had already been in manual operations because they had no power. So they were quickly and easily able to transition back to manual operations. And we called the contractors and troubleshooting begins. So here's what the consequences were. Basically, 72 hours later and $15,000 later, not a big number, but the big thing is 72 hours with no automated operation within the plant, everything in manual mode. We are back up and online. So we do an after-action report. Strangely enough, the first one we'd ever done at the authority in any kind of an event. And as you find in most events, there was no single cause here of what that failure was, right? It was a series of cascading events that kept building upon itself and caused the outage and slowed the response to get us back up 72 hours later. So what we wind up with is, at some point, and who knows when, we had what was probably a well-intentioned employee or contractor who had gone in to fix an issue and put a $20 home office grade D-Link switch into a PLC cabinet and into the loop that goes around the plant. So as they got to the point where they brought this down and then brought it back up, that hub failed, right? So that hub initiated and sparked off all the comms traffic going through, brought it down, and then lo and behold, we find out. So as we're going through and trying to troubleshoot, we don't have the right diagnostic tools, right? So now I've got people hopping from cabinet to cabinet in the field, trying to communicate back, going good or no good. So that's not a very efficient way to do things at a plant. To top it off, the documentation was not very good. So there were things on plant that were not on drawings, and things on drawings that were not on plant. So moving on from there. So we did bring it back up about 24 hours later after initial incident, put a real switch in, and lo and behold, we find out that these little things, these PLC batteries, had not been getting maintenance, right? Standard task, it's a normal PMI kind of an event. not getting maintenance. So when those PLCs came back up, guess what they did not have? They did not have code, right? You go back into the archives and find out there are no archives for PLC code, right? And then you're winding up calling the contractor again who had done that, trying to get back to what you had the day that the thing had. All told, 72 hours. The response was okay. Wasn't the best response that we would have hoped for. This should have been a couple-hour event, in my estimation, if we had everything in place and we're ready to go. Okay, so lessons learned. Don't ever schedule things for Friday. It sucks. You know, and I know that having worked in the industry for a while, we all inherently know that, right? But we forget over time. We take things for granted. Don't do that. Okay, personnel-wise, I've got some pretty good IT people. We've got great operations people who maintain and operate the plant. People on that security side and we didn't have that really. And the ones that we had that were either IT or operations that were trying to fill that security void didn't have the proper training to respond. So we've improved that. We're sending people now to courses like this to improve. And really, this nexus here, which is where I think you guys all are or want to be, right? That's why you're here. We don't have any of those. And I really don't have any thought of ever having those. Going back to the funding issue that I have, it's just not realistic for me to be able to pay a team to come in and have that kind of skill set 24/7 on my staff. So in order to facilitate that, I have to contract wisely and make sure that we have plans in place to go forward. Okay, what else we learned? So looking at our threat landscape, everybody knows what these are, right? So when we looked at it and when we did our lessons learned, we came up with an interesting observation, which may have been, so our person was here. Somebody that we trusted and knew put that in there, trying to do the right thing, got it up. Perhaps they meant to go back, maybe they didn't. And then that equipment failed, right? So as far as looking at this from a risk-based perspective, we needed to put more emphasis at this layer and less emphasis at this layer, right? Do we have all those risks? Yes, we all have all those risks, but what's my most likely scenario? What's most likely to bite me when I go forward? Most likely is going to be an employee doing something that they shouldn't be doing and or an equipment failure, or both of those things there. Now, the interesting thing as we went through that was we looked at something that I thought was kind of important. Let's not focus on the threat. Let's focus on what the effect was, right? Because that effect was no different than if we had detected a targeted adversary. So had we detected a targeted adversary, we would have taken the system down, put it into manual mode, started troubleshooting, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So if we look at the effect rather than the threat, a lot of times what we'll find out is, or what we found out was, we were going to do the same thing anyway. We just needed to have a response plan in place and the people who could carry out that response in place to go forward. The biggest thing I think we learned is a mindset issue. So you have to accept that an event is going to happen, and it's all in how you define your event, right? So if I define my event as it could be a targeted adversary attack or it could be an equipment failure, it's going to happen. We all know it's going to happen. And then once you accept that that event will happen, if you look at this as a timeline, where am I going to have the most impact on that timeline? Is it going to be before the event happens or after the event happens? It's all going to be on the left side of that, left of boom, we used to call it, right? So before that event happens, having a plan in place, everything in place to do that is where I'm going to have the best thing. So I was reading, and Urban Meyer in his book, talked about something called the success equation. And I thought it was pretty relevant to what we're talking about here. So we know there's going to be an event that happens. What's going to dictate the outcome? Does the event dictate that outcome? If that's the case, that outcome is always going to be negative, right? The event isn't going to dictate the outcome. Your reaction to that event dictates the outcome. Your preparation for that event dictates the outcome. How you do it. Don't fear the event. The event's going to happen. Eventually, it will happen. How you react to it will dictate, is it going to be a tragic event, or a tragic outcome, or is it going to be an outcome that we can live with? In the military, we used to talk about an OODA loop. Is anybody familiar? Observe, orient, detect, and act. So if you think of this in this landscape that we live in, that OODA loop, as an operational planner or a military commander, your job is to turn that loop faster than your adversary, right? Be able to get inside their loop so that you're not reacting to the adversary is reacting to you. So if I'm in this OODA loop here, if you think of it in the terms of an equipment issue, if I have taken care of my observing, orienting, and deciding, then whenever it happens, all I have is a checklist. I go down that checklist, I find the problems, I fix it according to the plan that I already have in place, that I've already determined. If you have a human thinking adversary, your problem is much more complex because you have to think, they've already been through this loop and they've decided to act, right? So they're one full loop ahead of you. So at the very best, you are now reacting to them. And if they have multiple actions that they've already planned, you're well behind the curve. If you have no plan in place, if you have no incident response, you're in a pretty desperate situation. So to cover real quickly my perspective in the last 4 years, so you have to be included. So who do we have that's a manager or a senior manager in here? A few. Good. Most of you are frontline practitioners. Who feels included whenever things go up to executive levels to be decided? Hopefully all the managers and senior managers at least feel included. Nobody. So how do you get yourself included? So again, let's step back and take a look at building relationships, right? So if you're lucky, you've got a CISO that sits at that level who is going to listen to your input, and he's going to take it to the board. If you are not, if you don't have a CISO or somebody who sits at the table when decisions are being made, then it's on you to be able to give them that story. You have to develop a relationship, whether it be with your operations staff or someone else that is sitting at that table. Give them the story. Let them know what the operational impact is in a business case that they can take to the board and feel confident in defending, and then they can carry that forward for you. Okay, who's heard security is the #1 job? Security is job one. Who believes it? Excellent. Security is not job one. Security is very important, but it is not the most important thing we do. Our most important thing is we put out clean water, right? So you can drink it. So again, back to the relationships, whenever there's a conflict in a plant and a plant manager has to decide, do I need to violate a security principle that Doug has given me in order to put out clean water? Before, people could just do it, right? Now, what I have is I have a relationship. I get a phone call. I say, hey, I've got I've got a big problem here at the plant. I'm thinking I need to do X, Y, and Z to remediate that problem to push out clean water. We don't want to get EPA permit violations. We don't want to get fines, etc. The reality is we have to react to that. So, but now that I get a phone call, now that I'm included in the decision, we can mitigate how we want to react to that, right? So if you go into a room and all you're concerned about is security, 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 pretty soon your voice falls on deaf ears, right? It's operations with relevant security. So on one of my first tours that I went on with a plant manager, 30-year employee at the authority, had worked in wastewater his entire life since he was 18, started cutting the grass, now he's managing a plant, right? So we're on this tour. I'm a brand new CIO. I'd been there about a week, and I ask him as we get to the SCADA panel, and he's telling me what it does. I say, well, how do you configure the security on this? I mean, who has access to it? How do you do your credentialing, et cetera? And he looks at me and he says, well, how do you do it? How would you suggest we do it? And I said, I don't know. What's your individual risk here at the plant? What do you need? What I'm here for is to make sure that we're doing an appropriate amount of security so that you can actually operate your plant effectively and we can mitigate the risks that you have, right? So I thought he was going to cry. He was so happy because what they expected was someone to come in and say, I'm going to lock everything you have down. And then what you get, the most secure plant is the one that we lock the gates on. We put dogs inside the perimeter, right? Nobody comes in, nobody goes out, turn off all the equipment. It just doesn't operate. That's the most secure plant you can get, but it's not effective. It's not realistic. So it's managing realism of security with the effect of having to operate. Okay, and Rob kind of talked about this a little, right, this morning. So there's this overwhelming opinion that water is not a target, right? So while there may be more reported incidents in these other sectors, right, we don't get to decide who the target is. So somebody else gets to make that decision. So one of the things that I like to do is I like to shoot, right? I like to go out target shooting. At 100 yards, I'm pretty good. At 300 yards, I can hit a silhouette. At 1,000 yards, I probably can't hit the side of the building, right? But what we're trying to do in security is first take out those people that are going to be the main focus of the threat are going to be those people that have the skills and ability to do 100 yards. Remove them from the equation. Then remove the people that can do 300 yards from the equation. And back it out until you feel that security bubble is appropriate, and then go from there. Now, what I also have I have a friend who is a Navy SEAL, who is now out of the military. He's a whole different level, right? So he likes to go out for fun and hike through the mountains on these compass courses, go up blind, and they give him a 500-yard shot to hit a target. And then he'll hike another few miles, and it's a 1,000-yard shot to hit a target. How do you deal with that threat? I mean, that's your targeted adversary nation-state level threat in an ICS. Well, I can't really put my perimeter out much further than what I can afford to do, but now I have to look inside that bubble. How am I going to manage the threat inside the bubble? If I've got somebody at 1,000 yards that's shooting at me, I want him to be as uncomfortable as I can make him. So I'm putting other things in there, right? We're putting hunt teams in. We're working on other methods to detect anomalies, to be able to detect and respond more quickly, those kind of things. So then you're changing the environment to make that targeted adversary either more uncomfortable, so they're not as likely to be able to penetrate your defense, or go to the next guy, right? My target is hard. Go to the next guy. Because unfortunately, there's a lot of targets out there that are not as hardened. And then when I was briefing a group of water executives a few months ago, I used this same slide, right? So cybersecurity is always a leadership problem. Unless you have some voice at the senior level, the size and the scale and how far it spans across that organization, you just can't fix it. I can have a really good security team, but if I have no one holding people accountable for what they're putting on the ICS network, if I have nobody holding them accountable for procuring items that they're not supposed to be procuring, my security efforts are going to be less than effective, right? So take a look, and you know, it's not even a matter of having a person at the top who is technically competent. It would be great if they were, although that's a different nightmare. You know, we've had to deal with that too. But having a person at the top who is willing to be involved and willing to listen is more important, because there's a reason why they generally got to the top. I had a 3-star boss at the Pentagon who was a Navy surface warfare officer, ships fighting ships, right? That kind of thing. He was over cyber planning and operations, right, as part of the Joint Staff Planning contingent. So we'd go in with this big book on what's going on, drop it on his desk the day before. He would have actually read that thick book overnight, developed his opinions. We go in the next day, prep him to go and talk to whoever he needs to talk to. And number one, he's smart enough to carry the message, you know, forward to Congress or to the national security staff or whoever he's talking to. But number two, he understands enough about the business, and in this case it's the DoD and the military, that he can carry that message forward. Even though he's not a cyber expert, he's a smart person. He understands the operational art of war. Your CEOs, your senior executives and leaders, they're smart managers. None of these concepts that are up here are different from what they do every other day. So you still have to hold people accountable. You still have to manage your procurement. You still have to manage your risk. They do that every day in different sectors that they're working in. They can do this in cyber too. Unfortunately, sometimes we give them a pass and let them abdicate their leadership. But as practitioners, your job is to go forward, give them a message that they can take out, make sure they understand that message, and make sure that they can defend it.